Oh, I can cut this part out anytime I want.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Troy.
This is awesome.
Yeah, here we are. Oh, you know what? You gotta take off the tie.
Last time you did that in the middle of the interview.
That's right. No, I know. I didn't think about it. Right. Here we are at Community Conversations. It's episode number 2. I mean, we had an episode 0. So it's really 0. Kind of episode number 3.
Excited about it. That was good.
The tie comes off.
Have you ever caught the camera? And
I have not yet.
I
have not, but there'll be plenty of time for that, for sure.
All right.
Yeah. So, I work for the school district. My name is Tim Gorey, Community Conversations, and I take the tie off to just signify it's after work, and the opinions that are expressed here are my own and not the opinions of the Fairfield Suisun Unified School District.
Right.
Troy, you are with us today. And you may want to do that same disclaimer. It's up to you.
The same disclaimer of I do not represent my employer at this point, and these are all my own personal opinion disclaimer?
That would be the one.
All right. I'll subscribe to that. I'll throw that out there.
All right. John Harris last week didn't do that. He was like, no, I'm good. I was like, nice.
He went for it.
He did. Of course, he's a pastor of a church. I think he has a little bit more leeway than maybe the government employees that we are.
Yeah, sometimes we, those lines sometimes are a little bit more crisp than our personal lives are, where representing an organization sometimes gets a little sticky, and expressing opinions sometimes can have some concern.
Yeah.
But, we all have them. We all got opinions. Hopefully, we're comfortable enough to express them and to share them and discuss them so that we can figure out those areas where we can learn from each other, and we don't have to be afraid to disagree. It doesn't mean that we don't like each other when we disagree. It doesn't mean that I think the person I disagree with is dumb or doesn't have anything to offer, and I think it's almost the opposite of that. And when you get into a conversation or a discussion with someone where you can disagree with them, and maybe they can show you and teach you a couple of things, and vice versa. I think that's why we get involved and engage in these conversations. So
absolutely, and that's what this show is really all about. I mean, The idea is to bring people in who are leaders in our community, and give people an opportunity to get to know them a little bit, and from the lens of just a conversation that we have. And there may be some times that we may disagree on some things, and hopefully what we can do in this show is kind of model what it looks like to disagree and be okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we'll see.
Maybe we won't.
See how it goes.
Yeah. Well, the good news is for you, is because of your job classification and what you do for our city, is any disagreement, if there's a winning and losing part of it, you're probably gonna win against me.
Well, I don't know.
That's my guess. I mean,
I'm open to it.
I don't know. Are you really?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
That's nice. I'm open to the idea that I really don't want a Fairfield police officer on my bad side too much. So
I don't think you have much to worry about. Too.
Okay, good.
From what I know of you, you don't have much to worry about.
Good.
No, we'll be in good shape, I think.
And the first time we met, I have to tell the story because it sticks into my mind every time I see you, which you may not want to hear. But
I don't know if this is coming out so well. We met at work, right?
No, it was good. It was good. No, the first time you met, I was wondering, like probably a lot of people wonder about my name as well. How do you say that name, right? And it's spelled Oviatt, right? And I thought Oviatt.
A lot of people do.
I think a lot of people think that.
Yep.
But you introduced yourself to me and you said, "Hi, it's Troy Oviatt, like Soviet without the S."
That's right. That's what I've learned. Yeah.
And now, every time I look at that name when I'm texting you or sending you a message, I go, "Oviatt, like Soviet without the S."
Yeah, that's the problem with getting those sayings in people's heads, is that's what they remember.
Yeah.
It's easy to explain it that way, but when I was a kid, I was made fun of that way as well. They always called me Soviet Oviatt, and giggled and poked fun at it. Nowadays, it's something that I use so that people can pronounce my name correctly, because it is a unique name that some people struggle with. But it's also great to have a name like that, where I know who the callers are who give me a phone call and can't pronounce my name correctly and ask for the wrong person. No, that person doesn't live here.
They don't know me.
That person's wrong phone number. Sorry, I don't know who you are. So there are some good things with having an unusual last name.
I agree with that. I'm in the same boat. I got teased plenty for my last name as well, and and people want to think that it doesn't sound like gory. But that's exactly what it sounds like.
What are the common
people always say gore? They think it's, even though it's got two E's on the end, they always want to gravitate towards gore.
Is gore better than gory?
No, not necessarily. I mean, well, gory, it sounds like Gorey.
Sure.
Which is gross, nasty, horrible.
Well, so is gore.
I guess it is. I hadn't really even thought about that. Actually, I've thought, selfish me, I've always thought my name is the worst thing in the world. But but I hadn't really thought about that. Gore, yeah, gore is just the, that's the noun version of it, right? And gory would be kind of like the adjective version of the same thing. I hadn't even thought about that.
So I don't know which one's worse.
I really don't know either.
That's nice of them to try to...
And then I had a relative once who shall remain nameless, who got the name by marriage. Poor her. Okay. And it's not my wife, so if anybody thought it was my wife, no, it's not my wife. But it was a relative who got the name through marriage and tried very hard to put an accent on the end and call it Gorey.
Oh, Gorey.
Yeah, which, sounds very kind of French.
Ooh, that does sound...
Sounds nice, right?
Mysterical.
It does. So, but the reality is...
Gora?
It was, well, originally, my understanding, I've got some family who like to trace the roots all the way back.
Okay.
And my understanding is there's a gentleman who came to the Americas from France back in the late 1600s, and his name was spelled Gure with the accent, and it was Gure.
Gure?
Yeah.
Hey, Gure.
Gure. Exactly. Oh. You got it. And and then ultimately the family eventually moved to a location in the middle of the United States called Oklahoma. You might have heard of it. And during the Oklahoma time, it became Okiized, as we would say.
Right.
And it became gory.
All right.
Just gory. Just gory.
You call me Gory.
Just gory.
Is that how they talk in Oklahoma?
Call me gory. Kind of.
I don't know why we automatically...
I don't know either, but, I feel like I'm a little bit from Oklahoma because... I'm originally from Bakersfield, California, which I lovingly call that area Oklahoma, California.
Okay.
Because it's very much like that. Well, have you ever heard of the Grapes of Wrath?
I have.
Right?
Dust Bowl?
The Dust Bowl era?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's all about these people, the farmers in the Oklahoma area who had a terrible time with drought. During the, I think, 1920s.
I think so.
And a bunch of them migrated to the southern San Joaquin Valley in California to start a new life. And that's the whole Grapes of Wrath story. And my grandparents was that. They were farmers from Oklahoma that came over in the Dust Bowl.
I thought Bakersfield had oil. Isn't that where all the oil?
It does.
Refineries.
Yeah,
oil
huge oil
production?
area. In fact, the northern part of Bakersfield that I'm from is called Oildale. Oildale. You got it.
Gore is from Oildale.
From Oildale. And my dad used to work for oil companies before he changed careers and became a State Farm insurance agent. So, so the Oildale, that northern Bakersfield, has one of the largest, probably the largest oil field with the pumps.
Yeah.
The horse pumps in the west of Texas.
Well, driving through, I've seen some of those oil fields. I didn't realize it was that large. I didn't realize those were some of the largest.
Yep.
Huh.
But, you know, agriculture and farming is right there too. Well, lots of farming, agriculture all around Bakersfield those are the two big money makers for that area.
So how'd you get from Bakersfield up here to Fairfield?
Well, I was working for a school district in Bakersfield, had worked for 3 different school districts in that area. And all the school districts in Bakersfield are, there's no unified school district that's kindergarten through 12th grade. So in Bakersfield, there's a bunch of kindergarten through 8th grade districts that all feed into one big high school district. So there's no unified district. So I started my career in schools working for the big high school district, the current high school district, as a computer tech. And then I ended up becoming a director, and then was the director of technology for a smaller kindergarten through 8th grade school district. And I didn't really have anywhere to go from a next step standpoint. I wanted to become a director of technology of a larger district, have more responsibility. And in order to do that, I really needed to leave the area and go to a unified district. And so I applied and got the job for Fairfield Suisun Unified 8 years ago. And that we moved up here for that job.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. What about you? Where did you start with the Fairfield Police Department?
So I started in 2001. So I've been here for almost 17 years.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that was
almost 18 years.
Almost 18 years.
Yeah, because I came in 2011.
Oh, wow.
And it's been almost 8 years. So.
Yeah, so started back then. I've only worked at the Fairfield Police Department. I haven't worked for any other police department. So unlike you, that's got your start in another area and then came here. Right out of college, I came to Fairfield Police Department.
Where'd you grow up?
Interesting question. I moved around a little bit. I was born in Kansas, right next to Oklahoma, so I am familiar about where Oklahoma is. I jumped over and moved to Texas. I shouldn't say I did, my family did when I was a little kid. Settled in the Austin area. Lived there until late elementary school, so 5th-ish grade. Moved out to Southern California, and then settled down there until it was time to go to college, and came up to Northern California for college. Went to, I did 2 years of junior college down in San Diego area.
Okay.
Palomar College.
Uh-huh.
Fantastic college down there. Played soccer down there. But I also grew up in that area, so when I did my 2 years at junior college, I was itching to get out. Didn't really know where I wanted to end up, so I applied to a couple of different colleges. Landed at Sonoma State. Went to Sonoma State for a couple of years.
Okay.
Another
good place.
Great place to go to school.
Yeah.
Pretty small state university. The time I was there was about 7,000-ish students there.
Okay.
So pretty small, pretty close-knit community. Went there for 2 years.
Great teacher college, by the way. So for those of you who are interested in becoming teachers, yeah, really well known for great teacher, like early childhood education and teacher credential programming. So for those of you interested in becoming a teacher,
teachers are fantastic. We need more of them. I encourage everybody who has an interest to follow that through. I have a tremendous amount of respect for teachers, nurses, firefighters, police officers, those that are, they're every day they help the community improve a little bit. And teachers are, bless all of their hearts. Everybody involved in education. You guys don't get enough praise for what you do and the importance of that profession. So.
Well, I feel the same way, but I think if anybody watches this recording and they catch the fact that you mentioned firefighters in that group,
so my best
you might get a little
firefighter.
flack for that.
But
you did say it's your opinions, not the opinions of your employer. So
I think it's the opinion of my employer as well. Firefighters are pretty awesome.
Okay, good. I know there's a rivalry, but it's a friendly.
It's a great rivalry.
It's a great and fun rivalry.
Yeah,
we like to play off of it.
It's amazing. And what they go through it's pretty interesting too. The image that they see, the public image of what you think of firefighters, and then in reality of what they go through in their job and what they're exposed to sometimes is drastically different. And like I mentioned, my best friend's a firefighter, so we dig on each other all of the time. He makes fun of me for being a cop. I make fun of him for being a firefighter. But our stories are pretty similar. Why we got into the job, what we see in our job, what we take home to our families after our job. It's all pretty similar. But I think it's also the same or similar reasons why people get into teaching or why people get into nursing. I think that
mission's kind of a approaches, calling in that sense, right? So I interrupted you with the Sonoma State thing. Where school? So you finished your bachelor's degree?
I did.
And in what?
Got a bachelor's in psychology and a bachelor's in criminal justice administration.
Okay, so you had an inkling that you might want to go into law enforcement?
I did.
At that time?
Yeah, my interest started in high school. When I was in high school, it was in the 90s. We had cops on campus, but they weren't school resource officers. They didn't have that label yet. They were the cops that went to the schools and interacted with the kids and got to know who was who and who was involved in what to help provide a service to the community, which is pretty similar to what they do today, but it just wasn't as developed as it is today. Had a couple of good conversations with him, asked him about his job, what he liked about it. For a high school kid, it was drive a fast car, carry a gun, take bad people to jail, help people out. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. If I got to do something and go to work every day, that might as well be something that I should do. So started exploring that a little bit. Went to college, got a degree in criminal justice. But when I graduated, I was too young to get hired. Not only too young age-wise, also a little too immature. Didn't have the life experience that police officers should have. I went straight from living at home to going to college. I was lucky enough to find some pretty decent jobs that allowed me to work summer times and when school was not in session, and didn't really introduce me to some of the experiences that police officers should have of living on their own, having some challenges in life, learning from those challenges to apply to, just to maturing. So when it came time to graduate from Sonoma State, I realized that it wasn't time to enter the workforce as a police officer, so I went and got more education. And then I went over to Sac State. Comparing Sac State to Sonoma State, two drastically different schools. Sac State is a large state university. I think when I was there were probably 20,000 students.
Wow. Yeah, it's bigger than that now, I'm sure.
Which was a lot larger than Sonoma. I think both of those schools have grown tremendously. Graduated in 2001 from Sac State. Got a master's degree in criminal justice, and then applied in Fairfield.
So did you have somebody that kind of told you or suggested to you that maybe you needed some of that extra experience before you were ready to be, or did you just kind of figure that out yourself? Or?
I think I felt it. Yeah. Looking back, I don't know if anybody really told me. I have one cousin who's a police officer in the family. I don't come from a family of police officers. Okay. So I didn't have that insight of, Troy, you need to focus on this or that. But I felt that it wasn't an appropriate time to get into the profession.
That's interesting, because it seems unusual to hear that somebody that age would kind of look at themselves and go, I don't think I'm quite ready for that yet. I need something. I mean, it just, I don't know. It just seems unusual to me that somebody would kind of have that sort of internal thought.
I don't know if that was my internal dialogue. I think more of the internal dialogue was, I'm not ready to settle into a profession where I have to be a responsible adult yet. I think it was more that.
That sounds a lot more usual.
Yeah, and it just looking back on it from my lens now,
Right.
I think it was I just wasn't mature enough. I didn't have the life experience yet. But I think the past Troy was more of, I don't want a real job yet. I want to do what 20-year-olds typically do. And it worked out. I mean, I got a fantastic job at a wonderful organization, work with great people, tremendous opportunity for a very rewarding career doing a bunch of different things, working for the same organization.
So how did the connection happen between finishing at Sac State? I may have missed this. So finishing at Sac State and coming to Fairfield. I mean, it's close, but...
Yeah, there was... when I was at Sac State, the chair for my thesis was involved in negotiating the contract with Fairfield, or somehow was involved with the law firm that helped with the contract negotiations. And he mentioned Fairfield as a nice option, as an option of a good-sized agency that was hiring police officers that had a lot of opportunity, and he thought it might be a good fit or something to look into to see if it would be an interesting career path.
Cool.
Looked into it, went on a couple of ride-alongs, had a couple of conversations with people, and realized it probably would be a good fit. And rolled the dice. It turned out it was a pretty good fit.
Wow.
And here I am.
Yeah.
Stuck here with you.
I know. What?
Almost 18 years later. Yeah, who would have thought?
Wow, that's interesting.
Our career paths are interesting. I love talking to people about how did you end up here. And I think sometimes the message that we send to people, young people, is that you need to plan now. You need to do X, Y, and Z if you want to get to this end. And some of the most interesting people I know still have not figured it out, still have not developed a well laid out roadmap of where they want to go. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some value in being open to changes and being flexible and going, I'll try this out for a little bit, I'll try that out for a little bit, I'll see, maybe I fit, maybe I don't fit.
Yeah.
And I think with this next generation that's coming up, we're moving away from the previous generations of being dedicated to
one job for a really long time.
Something for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now you see the couple years here, a couple years there. I had a conversation over Thanksgiving with someone who explained to me that he's had his current job for 3 years now, and that's the longest job he has ever had, and he's early 40s. And he has not had a job longer than 3 years. He's in the tech industry.
Okay.
And he goes, that's just how it is. We jump around, and I don't work for the same company for a long period of time. And
it's almost like, you almost kind of consider yourself in a sense more of an independent contractor than, these days, I think, than people ever did before. And it was funny, on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, we had an 80th birthday party for my dad.
Oh, fantastic.
It was pretty cool. And it was really good. We went to, we were in Bakersfield, and we went to a place called Hodell's, which is a local place. It's a buffet, all you can eat buffet. And I had, I had my rehearsal dinner there when I was for my wedding, and it's just one of those places. Local spot. Yeah, exactly. It's a great place, and country cooking, fried chicken, and stuff like that. Really good place. And so we had it there. And they have these big banquet rooms that you can rent the whole room, and that's where we did it. And one of the things that he told us was, I have two older brothers, and they're 10 and 13 years older than me. So there's quite a separation there. But he told us, we asked him, what do you want for your 80th birthday? We're going to do this party and everything. Is there any requests that you have? And he said, what I want is I want all three of you guys to speak. I want all three of my sons to speak. And I want you to talk, as if it was my memorial service. And we were like,
oh. Like a eulogy.
Yeah.
a life eulogy.
And we were all kind of like, ooh, that's kind of uncomfortable, right? But then he goes, no, listen. No, he goes, I've been to a number, he goes, I'm 80 years old. I've been to a lot of, memorial services and funerals. And he says, people say the nicest things about these people and they're dead. They don't get to hear it.
You can't even hear them.
He's like, I'm still alive. I want to hear it. I want to hear the nice things you have to say about me.
Oh, cool.
And we were like, all right. So we prepared it. We kind of planned it all ahead of time. What are you going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about this part of his life, and I'm going to talk. Okay, so we kind of planned it out ahead of time, and it worked out really good. But one of the things that he had us share, one of my brothers share, was his work history, and he apparently, like, for his time and his age, he was a freak. He didn't stay anywhere longer than 2 years until he was 46 years old.
Okay. So he's one of these people that just don't have
and he never left the job. Made a point of saying he never left the job without having another better job to go to, like more higher pay or whatever. So it wasn't like he was like, oh, I quit, and it wasn't. And he always had a family, and he was always taking care of the family and everything. So it wasn't like he was, irresponsible in any way. It was just, he was almost kind of had this restless sort of feel to him. He was always kind of looking to that next thing, And then interestingly enough, he got into State Farm. A friend of his who's a State Farm insurance agent talked him into trying State Farm at 46 years old, and that's where he ended up retiring as State Farm agent 22 years later. Okay. So he found his spot. Yeah, exactly. But I thought that was kind of interesting, that now that's becoming more of the norm, whereas, he asked to sort of mention it. It was funny. There's a story about how when he did decide he was going to go do the State Farm thing, he told his mother, I'm going to do this, and this is my grandma, and she said, well, Jerry, do you think you might actually stick with this one? And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you've never stayed with the same job for more than 2 or 3 years. And he was like, oh, yeah. It was almost like he hadn't really realized, that. But I think that's so common now. I think people do think of themselves as more, a lot of the younger generation, especially in the tech industry, think of themselves more as an independent contractor who is gaining experience working on projects. When they get done with the project, or they're kind of rolling a project up, or they feel like they've sort of done a year, 2 years, 3 years worth of work, and they've done what they could do in that position, they look to move into something else.
Somewhere else.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I think it creates, ultimately, that openness can create a more well-rounded individual, I think, in a number of different ways.
Yeah.
I've always been pretty restless. I get to about 5 years. When I'm in 5 years in the same position, I start kind of going, okay, what's next?
What can we do now? Well, I think, and that's the advantage of, I don't necessarily know too much of what it's like at the Fairfield City Unified School District, but I can speak to what it's like at my organization, where working for an agency or an organization or a business or a company or a nonprofit where you can get that restlessness yet still stay in the same organization has proven, to me at least, to be a tremendous benefit.
Yeah.
I've seen some people who have worked for agencies where they just can't do too many different assignments. And luckily at Fairfield Police Department, we can do, there are a bunch of different assignments that any officer can do.
That's a good segue, because that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, actually, because I don't think a lot of people, and I don't know that I totally fully understand either, but I've learned a few things in working with you and working with some of the other police officers and some of the fire department folks too, that there's some similarities there. I was in the military for 4 years in the Air Force. So for me, when I look at like a rank and stuff, like your rank in your job is very much kind of set, and then you have ways to rank up, right? But then in the military, you've got, in Air Force, you have airmen, and then you have as ranks, senior airman basic, then airman first class, senior airman. Then you get into sergeant. Those and the sergeant ranks are all enlisted, right?
Okay.
And typically the people who are enlisted typically don't have college degrees. And then you have the officer ranks, which starts with lieutenant, and it goes to captain and major and lieutenant colonel and general. Those are all ranks that are they're what we call commissioned in the military, and the commissioned ranks are you have to have had a college degree in order to be commissioned. So those are typically like the managers. They're the leaders. Although your sergeants are also managers. They manage airmen, and they often have a lot of leadership responsibility, but they report to the officers.
Okay.
So two aspects that I'm interested in you kind of explaining a little bit more in depth. Number one, rank in the police officers corps, because I know you're a sergeant, right?
Yeah.
And then there is lieutenants and there's captains and that sort of thing. And I kind of understand like where they are, but clearly you have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, so there's no sort of delineation necessarily between sergeant and whether you have a degree or not necessarily.
Correct.
And then in fact maybe a lot of police officers have degrees, or maybe do they all have to have degrees? That's another thing to kind of if you'll break down sort of how rank works.
Okay.
And then the other thing that's kind of fascinating to me is, for the most part, you're all police officers. You're all police officers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like you guys take on completely different roles. Like I know, like Greg has the role of public information officer for the department, which has its own like nuances and things that he has to know and be trained on and learn to be able to do well. And then your role is over the school resource officers, and you're like a liaison to the school district, and you work with PAL. And so I kind of like break down not only your role, but also like, how does that work? How do people get those kinds of assignments within the police department? Okay. So I've just given you tons of things to talk about.
I'll try to answer all of those. All in
but
one.
I don't think people understand how this works necessarily.
It's a challenge. So our rank structure is similar to the military. We're a paramilitary organization. So we do have a rank structure. The entry level, whether it's a police department or a sheriff's department, is either deputy sheriff or police officer.
Okay.
Those are the patrol guys that you see out driving around police cars, responding to calls for service.
Which some might call a beat cop.
Beat cop.
Right?
Yep. That's exactly what they are.
I've watched some police shows.
Which ones? Which ones call them beat cops?
I don't know. What? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. I hate to. I've watched enough of them that I'm not sure which ones would.
Are there any
I'll tell you what my
shows
favorite
now?
show is right now.
What is it?
My favorite cop show is Blue Bloods. You ever watch Blue Bloods?
Not one episode.
Really? I love Blue Bloods.
It's with Mustache Man, right? Tom Selleck?
Tom Selleck, yeah.
Tom Selleck, right?
Yeah, and he's the commissioner.
No, never.
For New
I haven't
York-
watched
New
one
York
of
City?
those episodes.
And then everybody in his family is a police officer except for his daughter, who's a DA.
That's not too. And that's pretty East Coast.
Yeah. So anyway, like I don't want to give you off but I'm kind of glad you haven't watched it, because I was afraid you were going to come in and be like, that show sucks. Like it's.
Yeah. Well, maybe it does.
So at least I could keep. Oh, it may, but I mean, as far as like being realistic, but I'm sure
kind of everything you see on TV is
I'm sure
very realistic.
Just exactly like it really
that,
happens.
and that I'm sure that's exactly how
I'm
New York Police
keeping
Department is.
the image alive right now.
Yeah.
So at least you aren't here to bust that up for me.
No.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure we have a couple of Tom Sellecks that work at the Fairfield Police Department.
Oh yeah.
And sure,
His name's Randy Finn, right?
Kids and yeah, I don't know if Randy Finn can grow a mustache like that though. I don't know if I see that.
That's true. He's pretty clean shaven. He's got we'll call him
a good mustache.
he's got boyish good looks.
We will say that? I don't. I didn't say that. He's a fantastic chief. He's a wonderful man.
Good.
He leads the organization well.
But I'm speaking for myself now, right?
Your personal opinions? Sure.
Fair enough.
So we do have police officers, beat cops. No, it's not related to an education. You can have a police officer who has... When I got hired, there was not an education requirement.
Okay.
Well, there was. You had to have a high school diploma.
Okay.
But a college degree does not dictate where you enter into that rank structure.
Okay.
So everyone enters as a police officer.
Okay.
Unlike the military, where you can get an education and then go in as an officer, everyone in law enforcement enters as a cop, a beat cop,
Okay.
a deputy sheriff. That's the entry-level position. Then some agencies have corporals. They're also called training officers, field training officers. That's the next step up, where you're responsible for training a new police officer that's coming in. After that is a sergeant. That's the first level supervisor. That's where I am. You need to have a bachelor's degree. At the Fairfield Police Department, you need to have a bachelor's degree to become a sergeant.
Okay.
Or maybe it's 60 units. How many units does it take to get a bachelor's degree now? Do you know?
120 semester units.
Oh.
So 60 would be associate's degree.
So I'm not completely sure if you need an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree to become a sergeant.
Oh, okay.
But you do need to have.
But that could be
college
different
education.
depending on the city department or maybe.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Different agencies
that's
have different
set
requirements.
based on the local area and the organization itself. Interesting. Okay.
And then above that, that's when you get into the manager staff. Lieutenants become managers. We've got lieutenants at the Fairfield Police Department. We have captains at the Fairfield Police Department, and then a chief. So that's our rank structure.
How many captains are there? 2, 3?
There are two captains.
There are 2. Okay. So chief, 2 captains, some lieutenants,
7 lieutenants.
7 lieutenants, and then, do you know how many sergeants?
Sure. 14, about 14-ish.
Something like that?
Somewhere around there.
Okay.
Maybe a couple more, maybe a couple less.
Okay.
And each sergeant supervises a team or a group of officers. And that's the part where it gets interesting in the career field where, like you mentioned before, I supervise our youth services division, or our youth services unit. So that encompasses our diversion officer, our 5 school resource officers, and our police activities lead. But then also there's a sergeant that runs our traffic division. There's a sergeant that runs our street crimes and our narcotics division. There are 2 sergeants that run our major crimes investigations division. All of our different assignments have a sergeant that runs that group. And then there are other responsibilities on top of all of those designated group assignments within the police department. So somebody has to run our canine program. Somebody has to run our firearms program. Somebody runs our SWAT program. Somebody runs our crisis negotiations team. And all of these other extra ancillary duties that officers can do, sergeants and lieutenants also manage those groups. So for example, I run our youth services unit, but I also manage our firearms program. So that responsibility will follow me to the different assignments that I have within the police department. So when I supervised a patrol shift, I was also the firearms instructor.
Okay.
And then when I go to youth services, that'll follow me, and that will follow me around until either the department decides that someone else should run it, or I've request to leave that assignment.
So is that, how often does that happen where those kind of like major changes in assignment happen? Is that something that happens that often or not really in
the ancillary
Fairfield?
assignments? Not as frequently, but for sergeants, we shift our responsibilities every handful of years. It can be 2 years to 5-ish years. We will change. For officers, it can, it's probably about the same. So as an officer, you can be a patrol officer, or you can be a major crimes detective, or you can be on a motorcycle, or you can go into gangs and narcotics.
So detective is not in any way a rank. It's a job assignment.
In our agency, it is not. In many agencies, that is a promotion to go into investigations. But also the philosophy of our department is you go into that assignment for a handful of years, then you come back out onto patrol to share that information, to grow from that experience in investigations. Where some other agencies, where you go into investigations, you can stay there for the rest of your career. You can be a detective for 10, 15, 20 years. That's unheard of at the Fairfield Police Department. We just don't have that anymore. In the past we did. Maybe we'll go back to that in the future. But right now, a 5-year stint as a major crimes detective is a long stint.
Well, I say it seems like there would be the benefit to that would be that you, again, the well-rounded thing, where you get a lot of people who have a lot of experience in different roles, and as people, sort of rise through the ranks, you have people who really understand how all of it works, at least to a certain degree, rather than being kind of pigeonholed into one aspect of it too much. But then, of course,
it's an interesting perspective.
So the flip side then would be then that it seems like that nobody gets to be a super expert either.
Yeah, jack of all trades, master of none. Right. That's sometimes that we run into that issue, especially in some assignments like major crimes detective, homicide detective.
Right.
It seems that just when you start hitting your flow, you start understanding how cases roll out typically, is the time that you start transitioning into a different assignment. Some other assignments, it's not as impactful, where you can come in for a couple of years and then leave, and it doesn't really change much. It's all the philosophies of what you think is best for the community is different in each organization. But for ours, do a couple of years, go to something different.
Interesting.
I enjoy the approach of doing it for a couple of years. I like the idea of...
That's going back to like what you were talking about before, is if you're one of those people like me who gets a little bored after a while, it's good to know that you can stay with the same organization and do something different. Try something
career ADHD is what I call it. You do something for a little while, then I'm kind of bored. I want to go do something else. Maybe you'll go back, maybe you won't. Yeah, I tend to lean a little bit closer to that than the guy who wants to go push a patrol car for 25, 30 years. Or go be a detective for 25, 30 years. There are some people that find their niche. I've worked with some people that absolutely has happened, and their niche is in special assignments, or a specific special assignment. But I think that's the exception, not the norm, from what I've seen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it seemed like you mentioned that when you were doing your college stuff that you had some sense that there were things that you were studying for that you were interested that were really specific to working with students. Was that, I guess you talked to somebody who was sort of like a school resource officer, right? But have you not done this role up until just a couple of years ago, or a year when Jeff?
So I'm kind of a retread.
Okay, you've done it.
I've done a couple of retreadings. Okay. So as an officer, I was a school resource officer at Vanden High, a school district right next to Fairfield.
Oh, right.
Unified School District. Yep. So I was at Vanden High as a school resource officer for a few years, and now I'm retreading back into youth services as a sergeant. I did the same thing for investigations. I was a major crimes detective for a handful of years, and then I retreaded and I supervised the investigations unit for a few years as a sergeant.
Okay.
So there are a couple of paths that I keep revisiting. I would say the two best assignments that I've ever had in my career were being involved in youth services as a school resource officer and being involved in investigations as a sex crimes child abuse detective. Those were two phenomenal assignments that were tremendously rewarding, that had great payoff, not only for me personally, but the impact that it has on the community and the ability to give back and to get into the philosophies of why I became a police officer is exactly that. I enjoy knowing that each day I come to work and I put in my day's work, the community is a little bit better for the efforts that I put forth. And that's the motivation for me. And I see that impact as, well, I guess patrol officers do the same thing. They probably interact more with the community than any investigator or school resource officer does. Oh man, now I'm thrown. So maybe a patrol officer has more interaction with the community, but for the relationship building and the molding and the developing and the influence as a school resource officer was pretty awesome. 10 years after I was a school resource officer, I ran into a couple of past students of mine who were interested in law enforcement. I actually work with a few cops who were students. Oh, and these guys got me good. Tim, these guys got me good. The most recent one, I was sitting in the break room at the police department, eating my lunch, and one of the newer officers comes in and sits down. And we start having some casual conversation, and finally he turns to me and he goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" Which is always a bad start to a conversation.
Like, oh, shoot.
And then the conversation, developed into, I was his school resource officer.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was, oh, wow, like a brick to the face of a student who was at Vanden High School when I was a school resource officer is now old enough to be a police officer, and I work alongside him. Is a stiff dose of reality that I wasn't prepared for. But now I work with a few of them, a handful of them. There are probably 3 or 4 officers now who were students at Vanden. And it's not just those that become police officers, but those who go into the military, those who own restaurants, those who are successful businessmen in the community. Nurses at North Bay who were students when I was at Vanden. It's great to see that impact, to revisit and go, hey, I remember you as a teenage student, and I remember you as a much younger police officer, and to see what their life has become and how they got there and what their influences were, I find to be really interesting.
Yeah, I do too.
It's cool.
I think that's pretty awesome. I think it's a fascinating. Probably the most fascinating part of working with students, especially high school students, is because you kind of get to see them in that place have an impact, and then often you see them afterwards. People who teach, I mean, they
I couldn't imagine that. Walking through the mall or the grocery store.
Right. Well, it's funny. I'll tell you the story. I've had numerous types of situations like what you're talking about, where I was the person joining and starting to work with a teacher or somebody who worked with me in the past as a high school student, and then the reverse, doing where I welcomed people who I worked with when they were students, and then they became peers as well. So I've seen it from both sides too, and it's always really interesting. When I started working at the Kern High School District, I was working part-time as a computer technician at a time when they were just starting to do those sorts of things at high schools. And they were large high schools, so there was a lot of things going on. So that was kind of where it really began, having tech people out at the schools doing stuff. And I worked at the high school I went to for a while. Which was interesting. So here I'm.
How long after graduating from high school were you then working at that high school?
It would have been 5 years.
Oh, okay. So mostly the same.
I was 4 years in the military, and then I came back and got this job. So 5-6 years after I'd graduated, and I came back, and I remember, seeing all of these teachers and everything, having a really hard time calling them by their first name.
Hey, Mr. Wilson, how's it going?
They're like, you could call me Greg. It's like, nope, I don't think I can.
That's strange. That's awkward.
But so that I struggled with that a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that.
But it was interesting, and it was a really good experience, and to kind of get to know that other side of them beyond their teacher and mentor side. And then I worked with this one guy who was one of my favorite teachers in high school, and I think it was probably his first year teaching when I was his student.
Okay.
So he was very young. He was a social studies teacher, really good history teacher. Got you really interested in history, and not from the facts perspective, but more from the perspective of what can we learn from what they did and like avoid that in the future type stuff. Yeah. Really, really good. And I ended up working with him on a project called Virtual Enterprise, which is a 2-hour high school simulation class where kids get to simulate being in a business.
Okay.
And so we were on this project working in really developing this program called Virtual Enterprise for the whole state of California, and it was coming out of the current high school district in Bakersfield, but we were expanding it to be this thing that hundreds of high schools would end up actually being involved in and running this class, and it was all in network, so they would work together to a certain degree to kind of create a virtual economy. Okay. Where the virtual companies that each class would create on the web would then interact with each other, and they'd actually buy and sell virtual goods from each other. Oh, wow. It was really kind of this interesting thing, and I was part of the team that created that for California, and I developed the websites. A virtual banking system so people could get paid and virtual money could exchange, and all this stuff. And then each of the classes would create their own websites that would sell their products and all of that. It was really interesting. And Jay Iliadis, who was my history teacher, was the coordinator of the program. And I was the technical person assigned to the program. And we worked very, very closely together and became really, really good friends. And he was my former teacher. And at one point we went to New York for a week and took 40 students to New York because New York had the Virtual Enterprise program, a version of it, before California did. So we took some students to New York City to see how they do Virtual Enterprise, and they did like a conference where we're all, we took like 8 teams of 4 kids from 8 different schools to there for a week and have this interaction with their schools, and they set up booths, and each school was acting like a company at a conference, and they were selling each other virtual things and doing pitches.
And the conference they did what during the school year you did virtually online.
Right. So it was an opportunity just for that time to get together face to face and actually have like a face to face interaction, which was really valuable obviously for the students. And I got to go along and be a chaperone for the trip. And here we are. Of course, we took in some sightseeing with the kids and everything while we were there. Had some opportunities, and at one point we were in Times Square, and walking down the street in Times Square, and it was just me and Jay, and there were a number of other adults who had groups of kids. But for whatever reason, it was me and Jay and maybe a couple of kids walking down the street, going into a different store, and somebody from behind us said, "Mr. Iliadis." And we thought it was one of the students, right? And so we both turn around. He turns around, and here comes walking up this kid who graduated from high school and was one of his students like 5 years before. And he was living in New York City.
Ran into him in Times Square of New York City.
Yeah. And he was doing Broadway musical work and stuff. Cool. And so we're in Times Square, and he calls out his name when we're talking to him. But every time I was with Jay, I think partly because he was such a great teacher and had great relationships with the students, but partly because you just end up having thousands of students over years, right? Mm-hmm. Everywhere we would go, it was Mr. Iliadis, and it was some former student, and he was like, "What's up?" And they were talking, and they were like, "Where have you been?" And he'd remember all of them.
Really?
Oh, it was unbelievable. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, so he was one of those people but I think a lot of teachers have that kind of experience when they've been there for a long time, for more than 10 years, 15 years. The longer they go, the more of those kinds of things that happen when you're just out and about somewhere, and not even in your own town, but traveling, and you see students, former students and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Fantastic, and I think that goes to show. Part of why I respect teachers so much is the likelihood of them to have such a significant impact upon a large number of students or people, adults, future adults, is tremendous. I mean, it's great. And just as the great teachers have tremendous impact, I think encouragement for what I've seen working around the teachers as well is that the concern of not reaching some of those students is also very inspiring to the teachers. Of the fear of this kid over here is struggling as well, and I just can't reach that kid for whatever reason, whatever barrier is there, and there's complex issues and things. Maybe it's the issues with the teacher, maybe it's issues with the student, or maybe it's issues with things that neither have control over.
Yep.
But I've spoken to a number of teachers who explain that that's part of their motivation is, how do I reach that kid? How do I get that kid as well as the other 20 kids who are getting it and moving along? How do I also grab that one to learn this subject matter as well?
Yeah, I think that in many ways that's the hallmark of a great teacher, is the person who's able to kind of notice and be concerned enough to even lose sleep at night.
Sure.
Really over how do I reach that one? How do I reach that one that really, really, really needs it?
I think that's a lot of public servants.
Oh, absolutely.
Deal with that.
Yeah.
And I work with a bunch of men and women who also struggle with some of those thoughts of how can we, and maybe it's not an individual, but how do we reach out and how do we help this part of the community or this part of the business community or school site? How do we open this dialogue? And I think, unfortunately, the profession has suffered from a lack of dialogue both ways. I think sometimes the community feels that police officers are not approachable, and sometimes police officers feel that sometimes the community is not approachable. But I think that understanding that truly being engaged is what brings value both ways. The idea of asking the police department what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it should happen just as much as the police department should be willing to explain what we're doing and how we're doing and why we're doing it should happen. But reaching out to the team at PAL when I walk around the Police Activities League, walking down the hallway, and once you get past that awkward moment of, it's just socially awkward moment too, when you first get introduced to someone to start that conversation, that should be the only awkward time. All that middle conversation and discussion of what can we do for our community? How can we protect this segment of the population from that segment of the population? How do criminals interact with victims, and how do they pick them, and how do they decide on this person over here and not that person over there? I think the more we discuss that as a group, knowing that the community has tremendous power in not only preventing crime but also discouraging crime. I think that's the difference between those communities that have strong reaction and strong preventative measures in place for crime and those that don't. And it's sad to see some of those cities that don't have that relationship.
Right. I think Fairfield and Suisun, in my experience, does that really well. Although, to be fair, I get an inside look, in my role, and I get the opportunity to spend a lot of time with the police officers, and so I do get to know you a little more personally than I think the common person does. But what I've seen is a lot of openness, a lot of really purposeful openness to creating relationships and to explaining things and being open, being approachable. Because the uniform itself, it makes it a little difficult sometimes.
Sure.
Right? You see the uniform and it's like, ooh. Police officer, they're in their official capacity. They are all business.
Yep.
Things they could be dealing with something really rough right now. Which you could, but at the same time, I think the people in the uniforms in our area do a fantastic job of really trying to break through those barriers as much as possible. That being said, like I said, I have a lot more of access than the normal person does. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to get people like you on the show, to be able to give people a little bit more access to see, like, oh, look, Troy's a human being.
Right.
And,
right.
has goals and ideas and just like anybody else. And inside that uniform, he's got things that are kind of driving him that he's interested in. You and other people in positions of authority are going to make mistakes at times, and the hope is that if people know you a little bit better, then they give you a little bit more slack. They're like, well, I know I know their intention. I believe their intention is good. If they've done something that I don't think is right, then maybe there's a reason for that's below the surface. It's all of these issues, and I know police work is always more nuanced, more complicated than people think it is. And even though people think, obviously it's going to be complicated, it's all human beings that we're dealing with here. But it's really important to kind of expose those things a little bit and to kind of pull back the curtain and get a more personal understanding of who people are.
I think those are good points. I agree with most of them. I'll shift a little bit away from it. Yes, we are all humans. We are all people. But I think that the expected high standard should stay there. Because when police officers do make mistakes, and we do, we're people, we're humans, everything you just said, that's absolutely true. However, when we do make mistakes, the impact that has on the person that we're making that mistake around, or the community that is exposed to that mistake, is tremendously negative. I'm a person. I live in a community. I have a family. I'm part of a community as well. I expect the police officers that are involved in my community to be extremely professional, do their job correctly, and not make mistakes. I know that is an unlikely expectation that will ever be matched. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to strive for that. I think that I demand high expectations of myself. I have high expectations of those that work with me or work for me as well. Just because I have seen the impact that those small mistakes can have on a person or an entire community. And it's a really interesting world that we live in. I believe that we're more similar than we are different. I believe that if every person in the community held the view that police officers are people as well, just as every police officer held the view that every member in our community deserves the highest level of professional law enforcement service possible, everything would be gravy. It would be a fantastic community to live in. But the issue and the problem comes in when emotions come into play, when different perspectives or different definitions of things come into play. I think all of us want a city that is crime-free. I think you can survey as many people as you want to and ask, do you want to live in a community that's crime-free? I think the vast majority of them will say, absolutely, that's what I want. But what we differ on is, how do you get there?
Right.
How do we police ourselves in a way that tries to rid crime from our community without stepping on toes, An adage just popped into my mind.
Unnecessarily taking away freedoms.
Yep.
You're right.
If I'm going to make a car stop, and I don't know who's in that car, I don't know what their history is or what they're about when I make that car stop, unless I recognize the person. But for the most of the time when I make car stops, I don't know who this person is. Could it be you on your way to work? Could it be her on her way to her drug dealer? Could it be him on his way to the bank, or could it be him on his way to the grocery store? Who knows? And in our community, we have all of those people. But as a police officer, I'm making a car stop for a violation to help the community be safer. But if I stop someone who has been stopped 5 or 6 times this month, they might have a different approach than someone who this is the first time they've been pulled over in 5 or 6 years. That's when those definitions and those approaches and those points of view have a very interesting mix. And where those come together and meet and how that happens, I would like to believe everybody could sit around and talk about it and say, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve. But that doesn't happen all the time. Right. And that's when we get stuck in those spots where confrontation occurs. Well, hang on, just let me explain this. Whether that's coming from the police officer or the person that the police officer is dealing with, that's when we start to get stuck in some spots that are not good for the overall community caretaking and safety of what we want police officers to do.
Sometimes, we could parse out the mistake comment versus the it's really complicated and nuanced comment. So maybe I didn't make that clear, but I think obviously, we all make mistakes, but I mean, it's possible. Actually happens quite a bit. It happens a lot in my line of work in the leadership in the school district, and I see this a lot with leadership all around, where the leader doesn't make a mistake, or they don't think they've made a mistake. They meant to do what they meant to do, right? And they have what they believe are really good reasons for why they made the decision they made, but the issue is very complicated, right? And so somebody coming from the outside of that issue usually thinks it's a lot simpler than it is, right? So when you're not working with that particular thing every single day, you don't get so deep into it that you realize how complicated. And we talk a lot about string theory in the school district, where from the perspective of everything's connected by a string. Right, and when you go make a decision that's going to change this thing over here, it goes and makes this change over there, and that gets changed over there because it's all connected, right? So it becomes every decision you make to change something can be a pretty complicated decision. But for people who are not in it every day, they tend to boil that down to a much simpler sort of idea, and they're like, "Why did they make that decision? I don't understand. That makes no sense to me." And it wouldn't, unless you had an hour or more sometimes to sit down and really talk through all of the things that affected that decision, right? And people don't. They don't know them. So, one of the things that I wish, sometimes that I could do, which I know I really can't, but as a public information officer, sometimes I wish there were ways that I could record some of the meetings that our leadership has. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that we talk about that are confidential, and there are things that are in that only certain people should know, because it's about other people, personnel issues or what have you, or personal issues for students, or whatever it may be that people just can't know. And so, but if they could see what the leaders in this area talk about, the things that I get to see behind the curtain in those meetings, and if they could take away the confidential stuff right, and just see the context of how those conversations go, they'd have an awful lot more trust, I believe, in some of the decisions that are made at the leadership level in their community, because they would see that the hearts are in the right place, right? The evaluation going on is a complicated evaluation, and sometimes there isn't a right answer. Actually, a lot of times there's not a right answer. I think this is a better answer than this.
Well, the right versus wrong dilemma is an easy one, but what do you do when you have the right and the right dilemma, or a wrong versus wrong dilemma? It's how do you come to a decision that has the best impact overall, long term? And I think that's a human issue where we want to understand what's going on. We want to know why decisions are made, and how that process is done. But how tedious and slow this world would turn if every step, everywhere along the way is explained, except for we work for public organizations. We have the public's trust for a reason. And if we don't take that time to explain it to a certain extent, why should people trust us? And I think when you have a couple of, especially when it comes to those right versus right, tough decisions, and somebody who believes their perspective is right, yet leadership chooses the other right, it would be challenging for that person to understand that the decision was made for what's best for all, for long-term reasons, in my opinion. And how do you then open dialogue with that person so both sides are open enough to understand compromise was needed, and unfortunately at the time the compromise went one way as opposed to their way.
Right.
And man, that's when people feel burnt. People feel betrayed. They feel, well, why aren't you providing me with a service, an education, or for, customer service from the police department? And how do you keep them part of the contributing side of the community to better the community when they don't understand how decisions were made?
Right.
And I don't think our fields are too different. I think law enforcement has a lot of confidentiality as well.
I think there's a lot of similarities there. And I think there's, the farther you get into it, there are concepts, overarching concepts that are useful in any discipline to sort of build that trust, right? That's one of those things I'm really kind of interested in and geeking out on is how do you build trust in a way that allows you to get things done from a leadership perspective, right? Because what I see a lot is the things that don't allow you to get done. You could be perfectly good at your job, you could be perfectly trustworthy, and yet there will always be a swath of people that are like this, but the question is, what's the percentage, right? How many people, what percentage of the people that you're supposed to be serving come to any of those conversations not trusting you right off the bat. Like, they don't know you, right? But they don't trust you.
Well, these are old concepts that have been around forever. I'm pretty sure.
And how do you make that better, right? You can't fix it because, but you're right. These are old concepts, and what's interesting, I think, too, is though these old concepts that can always be learned more about, and there's always more to learn. The mechanisms that affect them are changing with technology, and the ways that we communicate are much more varied today than they were even 20 years ago.
Sure.
Right, which is a good. A good example of that is the before Thanksgiving break, the fire, the smoke that was coming down, especially from the fire up north, and we spent, me and Nicole, my one employee in our communications department, our fledgling communications department, spent a lot of time that week before Thanksgiving break communicating with people a lot through Twitter, a lot through Facebook, explaining to people why are we keeping schools open? The air quality is so bad, right? And trying to kind of the challenge of trying to kind of talk to that and to speak to that and to explain that in tweets.
In a certain number of words.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You get 280 characters or whatever it is, right? And so it's a very interesting place to be because communication changes that. The technology changes some of those modes that you have to really work within, and it can cause. I think one of the things that's most interesting about it is the ebbs and flows are much faster than they used to be. The how fast something negative can get out of control, as well as how quickly it dies down. And people don't have as much of an attention span for that sort of stuff as they used to either. So it used to be that this stuff would, something negative would really kind of become a thing over a period of weeks or months, and news would be a part of that sort of ebbing, and then it would kind of go away over a certain amount of time. Now you see these cycles come up really fast where a lot of people are really interested and a lot of people are really even upset, about a particular thing going on in just a day or two's time. And then it kind of goes away all of a sudden. It's just so strange.
Well, I think it goes to show the expectations of the communities and what they have. The ability to reach out, like you mentioned, social media. It is shifting the way we interact with our entire community, not only from our perspective to get information out, but also how information comes in. And it's incumbent upon us as government officials to embrace that, support that, and use that as a way to increase our voice to others. And it's change. It's changing things. It's a new perspective. I think it's challenging for some of us who have been around for a little bit of time, especially before social media even existed,
right?
To get that shift,
Yeah.
And to understand that that's now the expectation.
Oh yeah.
Is someone wants to jump on Twitter and know what's going on. Someone wants to jump on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. There's probably a handful of ones that I don't even know exist yet. I remember when MySpace was the first way that you could communicate with a whole group of friends all at once. That was impossible back when I was growing up. There was no way to do that.
Yeah.
But that's how technology has changed, and I if we don't embrace that and use that, I think we're in for a world of hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to recognize, I think, and that's one of the things that's interesting about my job is it's really changing a lot. It's kind of growing, and there are things that I plan on doing, and then stuff like that comes up, that nobody can control.
Yeah.
And that's what I end up doing that week. And I don't regret it or I think it's easy to kind of be like, man, my whole week got shot. Everything I planned to do,
I wanted to do this.
That week was shot. And yet at the same time, in retrospect, I can look back at the week and I can say, there was a lot of actually really good community interaction that happened as a result of that. And in fact, there were interactions that happened on both Twitter and on Facebook. Some we weren't able to satisfy people. In others, we were able to kind of explain it enough that I think we built some trust. And that was all public, so everybody could read that after the fact. It wasn't just it wasn't just the people who were communicating, but other people could see that and like it, or say, okay, I'm kind of getting this. And so in a sense, that personal conversation that we're having with an individual or maybe a few people is actually a mass communication technique at the same time. And at the same time, when we were having some of these interesting conversations and explaining things to people, and people would say, well, what about this? And what about that? And they would kind of prod us and poke us and push us, and In fact, I had one interaction that was particularly interesting on Twitter with a student, where the student said, the air quality is so bad outside right now. I've looked it up, and I don't know if they really did, but I've done a little research, and the air quality is so bad right now. You might as well allow us to smoke on campus. Like typical, kind of, reasoning, of somebody who wants to say, let's see how they react to this. Let's see how we respond to this. And I don't even think it was smoke. It was the other thing, vaping, right? Like, why don't you just allow us to vape on campus if you're going to make us, hang out here in this smoke, And
well, where are they going to go? So we had a lot of these conversations. So in my family, we talked about this, and the interesting discussion was, okay, so close the school down, or close work down, or close the job down.
Sure.
Where on earth are you going to go?
Right. Well, you gonna stay home? I mean,
is home any safer than in the classroom?
Well,
or in the office?
The argument, and I'll be the argument because I saw it many times. Right. The argument was, well, if I were at home, I wouldn't have to go outside at all. But because I have to go to school, I have to actually go to school. Oh. There was a number of people who said I have to walk to school a mile.
Great points. Didn't even think of that.
So, and then between classes for high school and junior high, having to move from one class to another. Now, the science isn't really behind that. When you're in the unhealthy range, unhealthy sounds really bad, and it is. I'm not saying it isn't bad. But when you look at the recommendations from the Solano County Health Department, which is who we go by, is what their recommendations are, and you read the actual recommendations along with unhealthy, which is where we were solidly pretty much all week, that week, it's you can be outside. Sensitive groups try not to be outside.
So if I have asthma, stay inside.
Stay inside as much as humanly possible. Stay inside. Okay. That's the sensitive groups. That's not everybody. That's a small group. That's a small section of the total.
So if I don't have asthma,
if you don't have asthma, the recommendation is don't exert yourself outside. So being outside is actually not that bad in unhealthy air, but don't run. Don't exert yourself. Don't do push-ups. Don't do PE, which we don't. When it's unhealthy, there's no PE outside. If we have space to do it inside, we can. And all the sports and stuff, after school sports is called off, no practices, that sort of stuff. Anything that's out there where you're actually exerting yourself. So that's what it says. That's what we go by. So it shouldn't be a problem to be outside walking calmly for 3 minutes, for 4 or 5 minutes at a time. Going for a mile from school and to school might be a problem. I kind of get that. But at the same time, work with your neighbors, work with friends, work with family. See, maybe you could get a ride that day. Maybe you could carpool. It doesn't have to be something you arrange for every single day, but if we work together, our parent groups work together, maybe we do a temporary carpooling situation, help each other out. So those are the kinds of conversations we're having, why not vape? Well, my answer to that person on Twitter was, 2 wrongs don't make a right? It's like, just because the air quality is not so good doesn't mean we're going to let you vape at school.
Go let you vape all you want.
And then the answer back was, well, okay, so are you saying that it's wrong that you keep us out in the air quality? I'm like, I get where you're going with this. All right,
they want to go this. They're dead set.
It's all down. Right. But you have those conversations, and it kind of feels like this is pointless, right? Because in some cases, because where they're going with it isn't as much of a reasonable conversation as it is they're sort of poking the weak spots, trying to get you off balance, and they're trying to get you to a place where you'll say, okay, we call off school, you get to stay home. But the flip side of that conversation is that there is a fair amount of students that we have in our school district who are actually homeless or don't have good living situations where air is filtered in the place that they live.
Okay.
In which case, and we could say that's 20% maybe of our students district-wide. It's a fair enough number where we could say, and we do say this is the conversation that happens behind closed doors with leadership when we talk about should we close a school. We want to keep the school open as long as it's reasonably safe, especially if it's reasonably more safe than that 20% of kids would have if they had to stay home unexpectedly. Mom and dad are not going to be home. Mom or dad are not going to be home because they have to work, maybe. That younger child especially, if they're home alone, may not realize it's really important to stay inside when the air quality is that bad, and they may spend their day outside, which is not good.
Running around in the yard.
Running around in the yard, unsupervised. Or you have homeless kids. We genuinely have homeless kids. I know there's a lot of people that have a hard time believing that because that's not the normal situation. But there are kids who are literally live in their cars with family. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a good place to go. And it's better for them to be at school in those situations. And so, our answer is like, as long as we keep school open, there's a place for them to be. If you feel like it's a danger for you to be at school, then stay home. But what many of them wanted was to stay home with a free pass and not have that counted as an absence.
Right.
We can't do both. That's the problem. So from an organizational standpoint, if we have school open, we have to take attendance by law, and we have to count you absent if you're not, if you're not there and you don't have a doctor's note or if it's not an excusable absence. So, working through all those conversations over Twitter and Facebook and stuff, it was just like, wow, this is crazy. But at the end of the week, we looked back on it and we were like, okay, you know what? We actually added quite a few people, quite a few followers on Twitter, quite a few friends on Facebook.
Okay. Because of that engagement.
Because we had that interaction. Because people were like, well, there's somebody actually human here on the other side who is answering my questions, is willing to take the time to do that.
I think the more we do that
investment
that's what gets it.
I think overall is helpful. Yeah. That investment is worth it. It's a new world, technology-wise and everything. But when you give people that kind of an interaction, that kind of a human interaction using the technology, you get more followers, and when you get more followers, your communication is more effective.
Yeah, your exchange of information between two groups, the public and, in this case, the school district, is the goal.
Yep.
And reaching more people is the goal. In today's community, when it's much easier for me to sit behind a computer and type to you and say, hey, Tim, I don't understand why this is happening. It's easier for me to do that over Twitter than it is for me to go to a school board meeting.
Right.
Or it's easier for me to do that and to schedule a meeting with someone at the school district.
Mm-hmm. And the beauty of doing it over social media that's public is that everybody then afterwards gets to see that answer. So you can pretty much bet that if somebody asks the question, there's probably a lot of other people who also have that question. A few others
that have it.
Right? Mm-hmm. And when you answer that question, then that answer benefits all of those people who saw that, who also had that same question. And that's a good thing. Yeah. So it's interesting. I would say that the public information and communications today is sort of, in schools especially, is sort of like this burgeoning growth area, like technology was in the 90s. So for schools in the 90s, you saw technology go from being almost nothing in 1990 to, in the year 2000, there being entire IT departments for school districts where there was no IT department before that. And that all happened in one decade. And I think that's kind of happening right now for communications in school districts. I don't know how it is in other it may be the same in other organizations as well, but you see a similarity there where for the first time this position that I'm in was created and filled for the first time 4 years ago in our school district. And we're seeing these sort of public information officer type positions being created in districts all over. And then those departments are starting to grow because they're starting to see the value in having those kinds of conversations with the community that we haven't been able to have before because technology wasn't there.
Yeah, and I think the same questions are always there. People are always concerned about the education of their kids, the safety of their kids, and how, I mean, it reflects kind of similar. How am I giving the power and the authority to the school district to not only educate my child, but ensure that my child is safe, nurtured, loved when they're at school? That's a big responsibility to take from me to give to you for those 8 hours while my kid is in your custody. But as a successful community, that's what we need to do.
That's what we do. Yeah, absolutely. Communities have to set up structures where we help each other that way, and we trust each other in that way. Yeah, and it's this is interesting. We're at an hour and 23 minutes. Just so you know.
Oh man, it hasn't felt like it.
Isn't that amazing?
Has it felt like an hour and 20 minutes?
Probably to them.
What are they even talking about? What's going on? What are they even mumbling about?
They're crazy people. But it's easy. I think it's easy to have these conversations, and it may not be interesting to everybody. Probably isn't interesting to a lot of people, But I think as long as it's interesting to us and we're able to kind of communicate that out, there'll be some people who take a look at it and go, wow, that's a conversation I probably wouldn't have been able to be a fly on the wall for in a normal situation, and now I get to kind of see it.
Yeah, well, it's good to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Can I challenge you with something?
Sure.
So if the intention is to expose people to other people in the community who they otherwise would not be, what do you think the community would like to ask a sergeant from the police department that they might not have that opportunity to ask?
I can think of a couple of different things.
Do you want to ask them?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay. So, one I would think, especially in this community, because it comes up quite often when I see it online quite a bit, and with people talking a lot, is the issue of homelessness and how that affects our community, how the police deal with that in sort of the broad scope. But I think. I would say that there is this idea, positive, negative, true, false, not quite sure, but there's an idea that homelessness is a bigger issue for our community in Fairfield than it is necessarily in Vacaville or maybe certainly in Dixon, right? But as far as Solano County is concerned, there seems to be a lot of talk about it being a bigger issue in Fairfield. And we have some issues going on from a city level as well, where there's decisions being made. Right now, people are looking over, like, how do we deal with the sort of recent problems with organizations that were put together that existed specifically to help deal with homeless, and how the city council and the city manager are working through some of those things right now, as well as, there's attitudes that go the entire gamut in this city as well. There's the attitude that goes from I don't ever want to see a homeless person, I don't care how you do it, get rid of them, right? To the, people who have a, far on the other side, a bleeding heart perspective, where it's like, we have to do something to help these people, right? And what are we going to do to help these people? We have an obligation as a community to help these people get to where they can get on their feet. And give them some sort of success. And you see the gamut of ideas in this community from one side all the way to the other. So what is homelessness like? How do you deal with that as a police officer? What does that look like in your day-to-day? Is it something you deal with all the time? Or is it something that that you don't deal with as much as people think that maybe you do?
It's another big question, Tim. Lots of parts of that question.
I know.
Thanks a lot.
But hey, I just say that's what I know the community's talking about.
I'll start it by saying from each extreme end and everywhere in between, every single approach and perspective has tremendous value. Just as our community is extremely diverse, so is how to successfully deal with the homeless population is an answer that I don't think anybody has. It hasn't worked there's been a homeless issue ever since I can remember growing up. I remember being a kid in town, a kid knowing who the homeless people in town were.
This is the epitome of complicated problems.
Absolutely.
Community issues.
Is it a police department issue? No. Is it a social issue? No. Is it a addiction issue? No. Is it a mental health issue? No. It's all of them.
It's all of things. Right? Is it a school district issue?
Absolutely.
No and yes.
It's part of all of it.
Right.
But no individual organization is going to have all the answers. Otherwise, there would be somebody who is going to be going around this country implementing policy and procedures that solve and resolve the homeless problem. I don't know. So from a police officer's perspective, I would think every patrol officer on every shift responds to at least one call somehow associated with an individual with issues of homelessness, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, or mental health. Not that these are all the same people, but of those concerns. And those are all societal ills that the Fairfield Police Department will never resolve on their own. But I think our community is unique. I do think that the issues around homelessness in Fairfield are unique to Fairfield, and whatever works in Fairfield probably won't work in most other communities, because most other communities are not like Fairfield. What might work in another community might not work in Fairfield. And then what could work this year might not work in 2 or 3 years because the homeless population and their needs change. So I guess that's a really safe answer to say, I don't know.
Right.
I'm not sure.
No, but I think that is such a good way to couch that, and I think it's important to think about that from the standpoint of, I think we learn a lot from other communities. I know that when we go to conferences and we have opportunities in a lot of our jobs to go see how other people do things, and we can always pull things away from that and go, that's interesting. That might be something that could be sort of used in our area. But at the end of the day, the communities that we live in are so unique. Mm-hmm. And even here, when you say, when this podcast is really for Solano County, and yet, when you talk about the different cities that make up Solano County, you see some pretty drastically different challenges, demographics. They're all very different, and what works in one area is not necessarily going to work in another.
I would agree.
And I would
challenge your audience, anybody in your audience who has the question of what will leadership do to help resolve the homeless issue. I would challenge them to remember that we're dealing with people, and I would reflect that question right back and say, what are you doing to help resolve this issue? What have you given? What have you donated? What have you dedicated? What have you built? What structure or system have you implemented to help one homeless person, let alone the population of 300 or 400 or 500 that are in our communities?
Right.
And if
that's the John F. Kennedy question, right?
Yeah, what would no one ask where your country? Yeah, and I think that applies to today as much as it did back then. If I am a member of the community and I'm only looking to the police department, the fire department, the school district, the city leadership, the city management to solve all of the issues of our community, then I'm not in a right place to place expectations. If I'm the stereotypical super commuter who simply sleeps here at night, I wake up and I drive outside of the community. I don't know my neighbors. I don't know who the city management is. I don't know who runs our city government. I don't know who runs our school district. I don't know who runs our police department. Yet I come back to the city and I complain about everything. Yet I don't donate my Saturdays to any good cause or cause that I think is important. Because what you think might be a good cause, I think might be a sham. But if you're a person who's not giving time and effort and energy and thought into improving our community, then why are you expecting others to do that? Take ownership of that. I think that's the best thing and the best start we can do. And that's what I would encourage people to do, is find a cause or a purpose or a desire that drives you to improve our community and do that. There's a ton of organizations out there. There are a ton of nonprofits out there. There are a ton of opportunities out there for people who want to improve things to do so. I'm noticing the pin on your collar is a tremendous organization that does a lot of good in our community. But the Rotary Club is not the only club out there.
That's right.
There are, I can think off the top of my head, probably 10 or 15 organizations out there that do tremendously good work in our community. Some of them have very unique niches. Some of them are very broad and general. Go join one of them. Try it out for 6 months. Try it out for a year. If it's a crappy organization that doesn't offer you anything, then go try another one. But do something.
Yeah.
Don't just sit on your couch and, the internet trolling is a big label that, we love to throw around. But if you can spend an hour or two a night on the internet trolling and commenting anonymously to stir the pot or poke, well, why can't I?
You have an awful lot of time to give to the community there.
Go give that time positive. To something else. Yep. Go do that.
Give half the time. Give a part of the time.
Yeah. Keep a log. I think a lot of people don't understand where their time goes.
No, that's true. And I think you know what? I think they don't understand it where their time goes consciously, but I think most people do unconsciously realize that that their time is getting used in these strange ways that aren't really that helpful, and it creates an internal dissatisfaction for a lot of people, and they can't put their finger on what it is, right, until they get involved in something where they can serve the greater good.
I agree.
Whether that be, for you that may be church, it may be Rotary type organizations, it may be, I feel like I'm blessed, and maybe you feel the same way. I'm blessed that I get to make a living doing something that I feel like is a mission that helps the community.
Yep, I agree.
And that's a wonderful, I think in a lot of ways that's a great reward. I may not get paid as much as a vice president or a CEO of a commercial company would get paid, but I know that when I get up every day and what I do impacts possibly thousands of kids for their future, and that makes me feel really good. It makes me feel motivated to do what I do. So I get that sense. But if you're somebody who your main job is to do something that makes money for a company, that's what most people do. That's what most people do in this world is they do a job that helps a company make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is fine, great, no problem. And yet, at the same time, I think, it could be that people are a lot of times missing the opportunity to do something for the community that would ultimately really bring a lot of fulfillment to them personally. And
I
that
agree.
you don't really get a sense of that until you've tried it.
And I would invite them to work backwards. So there's an exercise people can do where you can sit down and you can make a list of what your values are and what you value in the community. And you can compare those lists and see where they cross, and then figure out from that list to then find an organization that matches what you have on your own personal list. So instead of going, I'm going to go try this organization or that organization, or look over here, or I saw this bumper sticker on someone's car, what is that all about? Mm-hmm. Instead of going that route and kind of shopping for purpose, write down what your own values are. Write down what you would like to contribute within the community.
Right.
And then go find an organization that closely matches-ish those. And I think finding an outlet to give purpose and thought, not only you as an individual, maybe you're part of a family, maybe it's something your whole family can do. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's something you and your boyfriend or your girlfriend can do, or your husband or your wife can do, or your kids or grandkids, or I don't know, your neighbor. Who knows? Go meet the neighbor who you don't even know their name, because all you do is come home from work and pull in the garage and close the garage. And you're like, I know people live there, but I don't know their names.
That's so true. That's how we live now.
Yeah. It's, and then that's how we get to the point where we're pointing to other people going, well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Point that finger right back to yourself and go, well, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What can I do to improve this? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you're already doing as much as you can.
Yeah.
And, spreading your time between work and family and church and sports and I don't know, whatever else you have.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be that earth-shaking, like this is a really core, I'm going to go feed the homeless or something like that. I think of the night where, I'm blanking, a National Night Out.
Yep.
Right? So National Night Out is this thing that's kind of become a pretty big thing locally. But that provides anybody the opportunity to go on a website, register that they're going to have a get-together on National Night Out, and then just work with their neighbors to, have a party. Mm-hmm. Basically, in your cul-de-sac or in front of your house or at your house or in the backyard or wherever you're going to do it. And, you think, well, that's no big deal. That's not earth-shaking, right? You're going to have a party, right? You're going to get people together and have something to eat and talk.
Maybe it's not earth-shaking.
But it's turned out to be something very, very positive for our community. And the police and the fire department and our school district and a number of other agencies, transportation, have taken that as an opportunity to get around the community and mingle with people and give them an opportunity to just talk to you face to face when you maybe hadn't known, that wouldn't have otherwise had contact. And the chief of police gets out there. You don't get the opportunity very often to go up to the chief of police at a park with a hot dog in your hand and say, hey, what about this?
Randy, can you really grow a mustache like Tom Selleck? Right, or were those guys full of crap?
Yeah.
Tell me the deal. Yeah, and you're right. That's
I heard this thing on this obscure podcast.
Yeah, me and my two friends were listening to this. I don't know if anybody else was.
Exactly.
But there are these two guys that were having great conversation. And now I wanted to come out and meet you. But you're absolutely right. There's tremendous value in that. And finding those outlets, it's important.
So community cop question number 2.
Yep. Ready.
How do you feel about body cameras? Those body cameras you got to put on and
fantastic.
So how long ago did you guys institute those in Fairfield? Do you know? Do you remember?
I don't know. I do remember. It was a handful. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago when we first started seeing them. Mm-hmm. I was a skeptic at first. I thought, why do I need to record everything that I'm doing? Mm-hmm. And then I realized, well, it's because when I come to work, I sell my time to this community to provide them with a service, and they should be able to tap in at any time to see anything that I'm doing while I'm working.
Dang,
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's a lot of people that would not have that view.
I'm kind of an outlier with that.
That's really open.
I am short of when
that.
I'm using the restroom, when I'm doing some private things.
Yeah, of
but
course. Yeah.
I don't mind at any time anybody tapping into my camera, my computer, my phone, my conversation. If I'm concerned about that, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
So I have found that the cameras that police officers wear, my first impact was it's supporting the fact that police officers 99.9% of the time are doing a tremendously fabulous job. They deal with challenging circumstances under very stressful emotional times in people's lives of chaos and problems. Nobody ever calls the police to go, things are great, I would like you to come, well, maybe National Night Out. I'd like you to come to my house and have a hot dog and we can talk about things. But most of the time, things have hit the fan and they don't know what to do or need help doing something, so they call the police. What we see on those videos are tremendously professional men and women in our community interacting and trying to help people. Sometimes my way of helping you is arresting someone who's doing something bad, and they don't want that to happen. And I was shocked and amazed at how many people, I don't really want to say will lie and fabricate things, so I will nicely say that their perspective of what is occurring is not reality. And when someone
lie and fabricate things. Go ahead.
And when someone comes to the police department and complains that officer so-and-so said and did A, B, and C, when it's recorded on their camera that officer did not do A, B, and C, instead they did 1, 2, and 3 that was absolutely by law, by policy, and was appropriate and ethical, it shuts the door to the false allegations of, I just don't like that police officer because they arrested me when I was actually misbehaving. Yeah. So I like the cameras for that.
But you're right too. Like I made a joke of that, but at the same time, you're so right. When people are under stress, or even when they're just going through their normal lives, they do have a different perception of what has happened. Sure. Sometimes, and so do you. So do I. Absolutely. People are like that, right? You get people in a courtroom, witnesses, and you're going to get 5 different stories, and sometimes the goal is to find the commonalities of those things where it makes sense, and that's maybe as close to the truth as you're going to get. So I don't think that's an unreasonable way to say it, that people under stress could perceive things very differently.
Different than what reality is.
And
this little camera that I'm wearing here, something that's important to remember is this is just a very small sliver of what else is going on. Right. This is a very unique perspective. This might not even be what I'm seeing. What I'm looking, I could be looking over here with this camera that's mounted on my chest that's looking at you. And I could see something over there that's really, really interesting that this camera will not pick up.
I never thought about that before. Did you ever get the feeling like, oh my gosh, I need to turn my body?
No, because usually in circumstances where I'm more concerned about interacting with this stuff and protecting people or myself, not what this camera is. Right. And that's why
you have to be concerned with what you're doing.
Yep. And you'll see online, go search, and you'll see.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that where it's like you can hear things happening and stuff, but you're getting this view and you're like, wow, I know there's a lot of stuff going on over here. Yep. But you can't see it.
It's a very small sliver of the totality of what's occurring. But then to go back to another very positive thing about the cameras is also for the public, for that 0.1% or 0.01% of the time where maybe officers would intentionally do something that they shouldn't be doing, knowing that this camera is on will keep them from doing that. Maybe having this camera on them will cause them to explain things in a different way, or take a little bit more time, knowing that this camera can be reviewed by administration or supervisors or themselves. The most powerful tool I've ever realized is to go back and randomly watch my videos and see how I talk to someone. Man, I really was short. I was cutting them off. I was a little rude. I could have explained that a little bit more. And that's self-evaluation.
Oh, yeah.
I need to be more aware of that.
That's so much more powerful, though, for
Tremendous
improvement.
Tremendous tool.
To see it for yourself and to kind of realize, wow, yeah, I could have done that better.
If you're truly interested in doing the best job that you can possibly do, is it more effective for me as your supervisor to come to you and go, Tim, you really need to improve your handwriting.
Right. And I can go, well, at least in my mind, I can go, that's his perception.
Yep. But if you're evaluating yourself and you go, whose handwriting is this junky note that I can't even read? And you realize you wrote that a week ago. Ooh, I need to improve my handwriting.
Right.
I've seen that be a tremendous value of those cameras.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very, very positive things that come from them. There are some things that were never anticipated. How long do you keep that video? What's an appropriate time to keep that video? Is that video that I record just my video? Or can the public at any time access that video? I think we've seen some legislation recently come down that addresses that exact issue. Is that then held on a public server that anybody has access to? Anybody at all that could see what police officers say or do to people in some of the most intimate, private times in their lives? Although, yes, I am a public servant, but when I enter into somebody else's home, is that a public document?
It could be requested through a public records
Sometimes they can. But when I enter somebody's private home, is that then public record? What happens when I walk into a hospital? Are there HIPAA rules that come into play? What if I go into a counseling set? I mean, there are some times and places where intimate areas where police officers enter people's private lives that personally I don't think that should be made public.
Right.
But if it's in the performance of my job as a public servant with the intention to provide a service to the entire community, where do those lines start and stop? So it brings up, and then how long? What if I have a camera for a week while I type my report? Should I watch the camera and the video of what's happening? And should I, as a police officer, write my report only what I see from that video footage that will then later be played in court? But like we mentioned earlier, I'm looking this way and I see something going on over there that I type in my report. But when that video is played in court, they go, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
That officer's not being truthful. Well, then how far do we go? Someday are we going to have a contact lens? I mean, we can get pretty geeky and techie and go, does it make sense to have a contact lens that I can see through, but then also is recording what I'm seeing, exactly what I'm seeing and where my eyeball is moving? But then how do you record what I hear? You might hear something going on in this building right now that I'm not even aware of, or vice versa. And if we lay a recording, or we have a recording, and we later see it, we go, I didn't even notice there was a bird chirping in the background, or there was a drip of water over here, or there's a voice in the background.
Or a really loud bass guitar.
Or a guitarist practicing. Yeah, maybe some people hear it, maybe some people don't.
I'm hoping the mic's not picking it up.
Because there is a very loud bass.
It is really loud. They're doing the worship service or something in Liberty Church right now. I'm not sure what they're doing.
We're in their space.
God bless them. Yeah.
So that's... those are interesting concepts that are all associated with the cameras. It's a tremendous progression in what we do in our job surrounding that piece of technology. But same with tasers. Tasers they're a great, phenomenal tool that, in my opinion, every single police officer in this country should have.
Yeah.
There are things that we can do with that taser that I wouldn't want pepper spray. Personally, if I was doing something where a police officer was in front of me and was choosing from their belt what force option to use against me, tase me. Please tase me. Do not hit me with that baton. That's going to hurt way longer.
Oh, yeah.
Please don't pepper spray me. That's going to burn my eyes and my throat and everything else for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
That taser, it's going to lock me up and allow them to control me and do what they need to do. But when it's done, for the most part, it's done. I mean, you get a couple pricks from wherever those prongs get into you, but it's relatively minor, especially when you're comparing it with the use of a baton or hands, feet, fist. I mean, whatever other options there are, taser is a tremendous advancement. It's great.
No matter what what was that college guy that on the meme? Don't tase me, bro. Did you ever see that video?
No.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to get tased either.
All right, I know, right?
If something has to happen,
There's
to
a
me,
really
it would be a
famous
taser.
video where this guy was in a lecture hall or something like that, an auditorium, and he was, being really loud and disruptive to the speaker, protesting something. And so finally they had the police come in and start to take him away, and he started getting violent, wouldn't go with them and everything, and started, punching and, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And finally the police officer was just like, I'm taking this out. And he goes, "Don't tase me, bro. Don't tase me." He started started really kind of changing his.
I'm gonna look it up.
Changing his attitude.
Well,
but then he did. But he
tased.
wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Resisting. So the police officer finally tased him, and that was the end of that. They took him out.
They didn't listen to the man's request to not
No,
tase
don't
him.
tase me, bro. All of a sudden, I'm your bro.
I'm gonna search it. I'm gonna search "Don't Tase Me, Bro" when we're done. And
Yeah, you got to check it out. It's something else.
Well, it's amazing to see that tool in action.
I'll bet.
If you want to.
And now, is it true
Volunteer to
that
use
as
it.
part of training that you guys tested this stuff on each other and stuff?
I've been tased. I've been pepper
You've been
sprayed.
tased and
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Neither one of them
So you
are enjoyable.
So,
but I would take a
so when you
taser
say you
over
take
pepper
the
spray.
taser over the pepper spray, you're saying that from experience.
Personal
like you
experience.
actually-
Oh yeah. Neither one are fun. I don't want to have to do either of them. But if I had to choose one,
Taser. Interesting.
but only if there's money involved. I'd do it if there was money.
Yeah.
You might be able to convince me to do it if there was money thrown down. So
How much? That's the question. Is it 50?
How much to be tased?
100? How much does it take for you to be like, yep, definitely, I'll get tased for that?
Full-fledged darts out into my skin.
Yeah. What's your price?
My lowest price?
Yeah.
Or my highest?
Your
Or what would I like to
lowest
get?
price. No, the amount where if somebody said and you knew seriously the person was going to give you the money. What's your lowest price?
Are taxes involved?
It's under the table, man.
So this is cash in the bank.
Cash in the bank.
Get
What's a
tased. $100?
$100?
Maybe $100.
I was thinking a hundo.
Yeah.
Might be.
I would consider. I'd consider it at $100.
You can $100 would make you go, maybe.
It depends upon what day of the week it was.
see.
It depends upon the surface that I would be on.
Have already gone to the bathroom. Right?
Wouldn't that be embarrassing? All right, here you go.
We're gonna video record this.
Oh man.
How much have I eaten? What have I eaten recently? Just to make sure nothing comes up or comes out the way it shouldn't. Because I can imagine.
Or the
Now,
way that it should, but just in a different
I haven't been tased, but I just can imagine that
Well, how much would it take for you?
you could. I haven't been tased, so I don't really know. But I that's a good question. It's tough. I think I have a little higher price. I think it'd have to be more like 300.
That's the fear of the unknown. That's why.
That's the fear of the unknown. If I had
$300 in your pocket, you would allow me to tase you.
I think I would.
Are you willing to sign a release of liability to allow that to happen?
It's really a good thing that only 2 people watch this show.
Well, I know where you post this video. And if anybody at the Fairfield Sassoon Unified School District would like to do a fundraiser, possible, I wonder if we could work this out. A fundraiser for some. You know what we were talking
That
about?
would be
What do you
interesting.
do for
What
our
can you
community?
do for the community? I could get tased as a fundraiser. All right.
think I'd have
So
to talk to our
interestingly
city
enough, we were actually
attorney.
just talking in Rotary today about how.
Wait, don't leave this yet. Are you in for this?
I
$300?
think I am. I think I could do this.
All right.
I could do this, and this could
excited.
be really interesting. Like this could be good on a number of different fronts. I mean,
All right. Explain.
There's nothing like fear and trepidation followed by real visible pain
Okay.
to increase your YouTube channel hits.
Oh, you want to do this here?
Oh heck yeah! Like, why would I not do that? Like,
man.
that would have to be on camera. Like, not right now, obviously, but we make an appointment, we make a deal out of it, you know?
Let's work out the particulars here. I'm sure some lawyers will have to get involved.
Maybe.
We'll have to work out how this is going to happen. What would the money go to?
I don't know. Like, well, I was just going to say, we were talking today in our Rotary Club about how we're trying to get together this deal where we provide National Geographic Kids subscriptions, which is like a year-long subscription for all of the third graders in the entire Fairfield Suisun Unified School District, which is about 1,600 kids. It's a really good publication. I took a look at it today. Pretty cool. Mm-hmm. I know if I was a third grader, I'd like to have a year of it. Not only is it educational, but it seemed pretty cool and interesting. And so
I remember stacks of those as a kid.
Yeah, they're really cool. And this was like a kid's version that's like really, really cool. Like it very, very pointed towards what kids would be interested in. And so we're looking for ways and people to donate money to do this, because it's going to cost about $10 per kid for a year, which is not bad.
So $10,
but that's about $15,000 we're trying to raise, and Rotary is going to come up with a lot of it, probably half of it, I think, out of Rotary funds, but the other half we've got to raise from other sources. So
I got an idea.
Maybe I could do this.
I've got an idea.
I could do this. I think I could do this. This is interesting.
Oh, I want to see this happen. So bad. Oh, that would be great.
I think this is a good note to end the show on for today.
I'm
keep that suspense up.
Okay.
We might. Gosh, people are like, why should I watch this show with Troy Oviatt?
Wait to the end.
And Tim Gorey for basically 2 hours. We've easily
Has it been 2 hours?
Yeah, we've easily broken the John Harris record that we made last week.
Sorry, John.
Sorry,
John.
You beat a pastor. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. Like when you can beat a pastor and the amount of time he can talk.
Is that a good thing?
I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's data that matters. Let me tell you.
Maybe you should edit this down where it's appropriate time.
I don't have time for that.
Let it fly then. Let
it's
it go.
going, man. Like whatever it is, it's out there. It's gonna go. It's like 2 hours. It's 2 hours. If you don't want to watch it, if that people, if that intimidates you, 2 hours of your time to watch something like this, don't watch it. You're not man or woman enough to watch this.
Another challenge has been thrown down.
Exactly, but if you didn't watch it to the end, you didn't get to see the part where I promised that I would be willing to raise money by getting tased.
Yes. I can't believe some people may have missed that.
This is going to be awesome.
Oh, it's going to be awesome for one of us in this room.
I actually have chills right now. I'm actually kind of freaking out a little bit because
I'm not going to let you forget
I
this.
certainly did not get into this podcast today thinking I was going to agree to this.
It took me 2 hours to weasel that in there, but I planned that from the beginning.
Oh my gosh. If you did, you are a mastermind, my friend.
Awesome.
I know you didn't plan that.
That would be cool, but
right. That's why these community conversations are going to get interesting as time goes on. You can't just get smaller on this stuff. You got to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm a little concerned. This is episode number 2, and I've agreed to be tased on a future episode.
How many of these podcasts are you gonna do?
It's unknown. I'm committing to do it once a week on Tuesdays, as long as it's worth doing.
Well, I'm going to come back for the 10th episode to see what you agree to do.
Okay.
If this is only the second, maybe the 20th too. What's going to happen then?
I'm scheduled out right now, 5 episodes. So, so I've got to find people but you know what? There's nothing that says I can't bring people back, right? So I could bring you back. And your episode will be the Tim's Getting Tased episode.
I'm in. I will be here for that.
This is going to be awesome.
Yes,
I don't know if we can do it here or not, though.
This table might cause some issues, but whatever.
Can I bring in some pillows or a mattress or something for me to fall on?
Bring in whatever you want to. I'll even, if this works out, don't even fall. You can be already laid down.
Oh, dude, really?
So sometimes, if you get locked up and you fall, you could smack your noggin on something.
Yeah, that wouldn't be.
I don't want that to happen.
No, Nobody wants that. I don't want any permanent damage.
Tasing is the best way to go to avoid
That's
permanent damage.
what I'm hearing from you.
That's
You've
my
really
advice
talked
to
me
you.
into this, actually.
Or I can pepper spray you.
No, I'm going to go with you
I
and
see
say
something.
tase.
We can do both. You can compare. That works.
No, I am not. I'm definitely not interested in spicy ice. No, thank you.
All right.
No spicy ice.
We'll work on that.
The tasing part is a more interesting thing to me anyway. I mean, it's electrical, right? It's electrical current, right? And I think there's a lot of science aspect to that I think could be interesting. We could bring in maybe we could have a science teacher, like be on the episode with us and like explain, the science of what's happening while I convulse.
It's a long tasing, but I'm in. Sounds great, Tim. I can't believe you just agreed to be tased the entire episode while a teacher explains how a taser affects the body. Good for you, man. You're dedicated. This is going to be great.
With that, I think we better go.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you,
I'm
Tim.
completely off my game now. Thank you very much for watching. If you watched this long, you got the payoff at the end, my friends.
The last 5
you got
minutes
the
have been
payoff. All right.
Tim, thank
Until next time. Thanks, Troy.
Yeah.